The wind that swept the wall tonight was a living presence, a thunder-voiced leviathan scraping claws of ice over merlon and battlement. Ser Denis Malista, Lord Commander after Jorah Mormont's retirement 2 winters past, felt its weight in the marrow of his knuckles as he leaned above the parapet. Lanterns guttered along the walkway, struggling to claw a circle of orange out of the moon-bleached dark. Below, the forest stretched like a sea of black needles, the frost-born hush broken only by the hoot of a desperate owl. Cold, but not the ordinary northern cold. This was deeper, older, a pitiless emptiness pressing in from every point on the compass. Even after 4 decades on the wall, Denys had never known the stones themselves to tremble. Yet they did now, shuddering like some captured giant desperate to break its chains. He told himself it was only the storm gathering off the shivering sea, but the lie tasted thin. A horn blast sounded from Shadow Tower's direction, so faint it was almost devoured by the wind. 1 wail. Oh, not 2, not 3. Rangers returning then. Benjen Stark's half-year ranging had been meant to locate the wildling host, rumored to be massing under Mansraider. That was what Denys reminded himself as he raised his own horn to answer. Though another part of him, a part he had once called superstition and now called sense, whispered that Benjen had left with 20 men and Morna White Mask, the Harjide Spearwife, and that not 1 crow had returned in the moon since. The watch was stretched thin as spilt ink. If they had found what the stories claimed stalked the haunted forest, they would have sent a raven, horn or no horn. Denys lifted the horn, lips numb. The sound he loosed was hardly more than a forlorn groan, lost to the shriek of the gale. When the echo came back, it was not an echo at all but an answer. From the darkness beyond the wall, the note was deeper, pulsing, as if the wood of the barbaric horn had been carved from old bone. Then came a second call behind it, overlapping, and a third layered beneath. The harmonics rattled inside Denys's breastplate. All along the rampart, torches trembled in iron sconces, flames bowing low, sapped of breath. The violent hush that followed rang louder than any roar. With a snap, the flame closest to Denys winked out. Another lantern collapsed into dark. A line of blackness sluiced outward, a rolling tide that devoured light wherever it passed, as though the air itself had curdled. And in that stifled gloom, far below the eastern watchtower, a blue glow bled through the trees. It was the predatory blue of some abyssal deep brought up to swallow the surface world, unblinking, cold, and impossibly patient. Something moved at the tree line, silent, impossible shapes gliding over the snow crust. The lanterns nearest the gatehouse flared and died. Someone screamed. Denys shouted an order he would never remember, and the men of the watch sprang for the winches to raise the portcullis and light the pitched trenches. But the first shaft of ash came whistling out of the black, struck one of the brothers in the throat, and pinned him to the merlon before he even realized he was harmed. A heartbeat later, the shadows surged forward, pale figures in rag-stitched leathers, some near skeletal, eyes lambent with that same frozen bloom of blue. Whites, Denys thought, his mind lurching backward through years of old stories told on winter nights, stories Jorah Mormont had once dismissed with a wry twist of his mustache, stories Benjen Stark had sought proof of. The wall moaned, no keened, beneath them. The stones ground like flint stones, trembling harder than any earthquake Denys had felt in his Westerland's youth. Men lost their footing. A section of crenellation splintered, thin cracks bitering across the unmortared ice like veins of shattered glass. Something enormous hammered from the far side, an impact that traveled up through 800 feet of frozen stone, driving a fissure the width of a wagon along the inner face. Another impact, then another, rhythmic as a war drum. Denys dimly saw shapes, giants in rusted chains, their skin tight to their ribs, arms gleaming with hoarfrost, swinging what looked like felled tree trunks reinforced by slabs of ice. The giants? Alive? Dead? It hardly mattered, were battering the southern curtain of the wall from the forest floor. The oldest oath in the realm was not to hold back men or wildlings. It was to hold back whatever these things were. But the wall was crying out like a wounded animal, and the wounded always break. At the sixth blow, the fissure burst open. A thunderclap of splintering ice drowned everything, and the world dropped away from Denis Mallister. He felt weightless, suspended in formless void, then crushingly heavy as his section of the top rampart sheared off and plummeted. He must have screamed. He never heard. He saw torchlight spiraling upward, saw the jagged rim of ruin recede, saw 1,000 tiny white shards fill the air like scattered stars, and beneath it all, that blue glow, inexorable, rising to meet him. When Denis struck the earth, if it was the earth, he knew only the blue. 240 leagues south in Winterfell's Godswood, Eddard Stark stared at a raven's parchment with lips gone the color of old snow. Moisture trickled from the weirwood's reedy-grimmed leaves, tapping his cloak in uneven patter. Dawn light stood pale and uncertain beyond the bowl of branches, as if the sun itself had lost heart. The birds had fallen silent since the first autumn leaf, but this silence felt unnaturally complete, as though time itself had paused in anticipation. He read the parchment again, wind worrying at the edges. The wall is breached. Castle Black fallen. Shadow Tower dark, East Watch aflame. Giants in numbers uncounted. Cold things. We flee toward last hearth. 80 left of 1,400. Benjen missing. Send fire. Send the young lord. Q. Send the dawn. 7. Keep you. No signature. Only the broken imprint of the Night's Watch's black seal, as though the wax itself had frozen and cracked. Maester Luwin insisted the raven arrived half-a-dead, feathers rimed with frost in the middle of full summer's third moon. The bird should not have lived long enough to reach the castle. When Luwin warmed it, it died in his palm. Pupils filmed over with unearthly blue. Eddard closed his eyes. His little brother had known the risks, as much as any man could. But Benjen had always spoken of the watch with that solemn fire that extinguished doubt. And if those old things ever stir again from their cold graves, someone must be there to face them. Ned had given him Dark Sister's smaller cousin, Ice twin-datched bastard kin, more ceremonial than deadly. But Benjen had kissed the steel and sworn he would return it in 20 winters. It had been 9. Robb's voice drifted from beyond the hedge, earnest, sword-busy, instructing his younger brothers in the proper guard of the cross. John's answering laughter rang confident and clear. In that one moment, Ned's peace shattered. If the wall was truly gone, if the nightmare of the long night came south again, he had 3 sons near man-grown, and a kingdom already on the cusp of civil war. Robert's banners were gathering in the Stormlands, and Eddard himself was oath-bound to ride for his foster brother's cause against the Dragon Throne. Now the cold ones were loose upon the land. And Benjen. He tucked the parchment into his cloak and stepped out onto the dew-soaked grass. The air bit like steel despite the season. Across the bailey, Winterfell stirred. Hearth smoke rising, gates creaking, stable boys calling to fractious mounts. From the battlements Clay Serwyn waved. A simple good tomorrow. They did not, could not, know that the world's edge had ruptured. Inside the great hall, Catelyn and Maester Luwin awaited by the carved weirwood high seat. The light streaming through arrow slits painted pale stripes on supper-scarred trestles. A candle guttered in the draught, flaring wildly before dying down. Ned took the parchment, flattened it on board, and let his lady see. Catelyn's eyes widened by degrees, like ice cracking across a pond in spring thaw, beautiful and terrible all at once. When she spoke, her voice was calm as any Tully river. Should we ride now? He admired her for that. Others would doubt. Catelyn's faith in him was total. We must. He looked to Luwin. Send ravens to White Harbor, to Moat Cailin, to every holdfast north of the Neck. I want hearths banked, harvests reaped early. Tell them winter has come, truly come. His words tasted like dead leaves. And to the south? Luwin asked, tip of his quill trembling. To Jon Arryn first at the Eyrie. He is still hand, and the king must know. Then a separate raven to Robert, with a hand of my own. He hesitated, only a breath. And another to Dragonstone. Address it to Prince Rhaegar. Not the Mad King. Catelyn's brow knit, but she said nothing. Between her tully red hair and stark gray eyes, a storm of unasked questions must have churned. Yet she trusted his judgment, and that knowledge buoyed him even as the hall's shadows lengthened despite the rising sun. "Will Robert believe it?" Lewin said, trying not to sound like a child, hoping the monster under the bed might be kind. "Robert will believe me," Ned said, though he said it as a prayer. We rode shoulder to shoulder in the Vale. Whatever has passed since, he knows I would not fable him for love of dragons. "And Prince Rhaegar?" Catelyn finally asked, voice delicately poised between steel and silk. Ned thought of the tower at Harrenhal. The music, the melancholy prince, handing a crown of winter roses to Lyanna. Of Robert's fury that night, and the quiet longing in his sister's eyes. If rumors were true, Rhaegar had spirited her away. If Robert believed it, Rhaegar was already a dead man. He met Catelyn's eyes. "For Winterfell's sake, for all Westeros, we must chance it." Storm's End crouched on its lonely spire above the rack of ship-shattered waves, a fortress older than the realm, carved of blocks so smooth no blade might fit between. Robert Baratheon rode through the main gate, astride the great gray courser he called Stagbreaker. Black hair whipping around his face, laughter echoing off the ramparts. His bannermen rode behind. Bryce Caron, Andrew Estermont, Lords Meadows and Errol and Selmy of Harvest Hall, all resplendent in bright cloaks that cracked in the salted wind. Robert's mood was blood-warm. They had mustered 2,000 men in 8 days, and more would follow. The Targaryen usurper, he boomed to any who would hear, would soon learn how Baratheons repaid thievery of sisters and murder of houses. Only Maester Cresson dared step forward in the outer ward, face pale, raven clutched to his chest like a child. "Lord Robert," he called, and the laughter ebbed like tide from the yard. Cresson's voice was grave cold, without tremor yet cut thin. "A bird from Winterfell. It is Lord Stark's own hand." There were only 2 matters in the world that could still the tempest in Robert's breast. One was Lyanna. The other was his brother Ned. He swung down, tossing reins to a squire, and accepted the parchment. The wax had cracked, faint ashen residue dusting his gloves. He read. Once he read again. His chest rose. Bell rose deeper. The wind seemed to hush, as though the gods themselves bent to hear his answer. "The wall is down," he announced. Voices rose in consternation. Robert raised a hand, silencing them. "Eddard Stark asks that we cease our march, join him in Winterfell, and prepare for war not against dragons, but the dead." His laugh then was raw, disbelieving. He looked around at the faces of a dozen sworn lords. "Tell me, do any of you know the chill that grips a man's heart when he gazes upon truth too monstrous to believe? If Ned says it, it is no lie. But Rhaegar." He crumpled the parchment. "He wants Rhaegar's help." The name fell like a stone into the hush. Bryce Caron spat. "Your Grace," Cresson said quietly, "Lord Stark also says his brother may have fallen. He begs you to come north." Robert's gaze drifted seaward. Spray leapt the curtain walls, sparkling like shards of crystal, before shattering on the flagstones. "When I took up my warhammer, I vowed vengeance for Lyanna's honor," he said. "Yet what does honor matter if the world itself goes dark?" He looked at the maester. "Ready the ravens. Send word to Jon Arryn in the Vale, and to Stannis at Dragonstone. If Ned Stark is not drunk on winter ale, then the realm itself is bled of its future. We march, aye, but we march north. Vanemi, Averwal. And Rhaegar?" Lord Meadows dared ask. Robert exhaled hard. "Send him word if you must. Tell him the dead come for us all, Targaryen and Baratheon alike. He will know what debt he owes Lyanna when she lies cold." Torchlight flickered in his eyes, which were dark as storm clouds. "If he rides to Winterfell, I will stay my hammer," he said at last, voice little more than a rumble. For now, on Dragonstone, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen walked the length of the chamber of the painted table, hands clasped behind his back, bootsteps silent on warm black stone. A buffeting wind whined through arrow slits. Lightning flashed far out over the bay. illuminating the carved relief of Westeros in harsh blue pulses. He had stood here often in his father's absence, commanding nothing, yet feeling the weight of command upon him, feeling history reaching through time toward his throat. He paused where the wall lay chiseled in pale marble, a thin line separating the cold north from the warmth of the lower kingdoms. Tonight, his fingers traced its length. It had amused him once to imagine the wall as a harp string strung across the realm, humming with forgotten song. Now that string had snapped. Behind him, Sir Arthur Dayne leaned on Dawn like a pilgrim on a staff, face as stern as the blade's pale sheen. "Your Highness," he murmured, respect wrapped around worry. Rhaegar turned, parchment in hand. "Lord Stark claims the wall is breached. The dead walk." He almost smiled. It sounded a bard's tale, yet. He glanced at the raven loosed from Winterfell. Ned Stark was no bard, certainly no liar. Robert rides north. Eddard begs me to turn from my father's war, to stand with them beneath the shattered sky. Dayne's expression did not change, save for a subtle tightening around the eyes. "We have our orders, my prince. The king demands. The king demands the world kneel to fire that burns itself out." Rhaegar looked back to the table. "It seems the world will kneel to ice instead." He pressed thumb to the wall's carved ramparts. "Lyanna is still at the Tower of Joy. The child she carries. I had believed his birth would fulfill the prophecy. But of what use is Azor Ahai reborn, if mankind is already drowned in night?" He looked up. "Arthur, prepare a ship. We sail tonight." Dayne studied him. "And his grace?" Rhaegar closed his eyes, seeing flickers of wildfire and iron and his father's mania. "My father will not bend. He would sooner burn the kingdoms than share them with Robert Baratheon. I will not burn with him." He opened his eyes. "If Robert is willing to set aside his vengeance, even for a moment, then I will answer in kind. The wall has stood 8,000 years. If it has fallen, legacies mean nothing." His fingers traced the table southward, to Dragonstow's carved clutch of coiled dragon. "We sail for White Harbor. From there we ride. And your lady?" "Lyanna stays," Rhaegar whispered, Ak blooming like a bruise behind his ribs. "She must be safe. Arthur, if you still call me friend, guard her until I return." Dayne inclined his head, pale blade gleaming briefly as it caught a lance of starlight. "So it shall be, my prince." Evening found the royal city of King's Landing glittering in wildfire green torchlight, the pyromancer's favorite flourish for Aerys' nightly promenade. The Mad King sat slumped upon a litter borne by silent gold cloaks, muttering to himself about traitors seen in every shadow. The heavy crimson cloak at his back did little to hide the tremors in his narrow shoulders. He called for burning each night, demanded the banners of rebel lords delivered in chains. When no chains arrived, his wrath turned inward, feeding on itself. In the throne room, Grand Maester Pycelle knelt before him, scroll trembling. "Your Grace, news from the north. The wall. Let the wall crumble. Let the north rot." Aerys hissed. "Swords in the Stormlands, fire in the Reach, and my son skulking in Dragonstone. Where is Rhaegar? Why does he not break these rebels?" Pycelle swallowed. "Your Grace, the prince prepares to sail north. He claims." "Traitor," Aerys rasped, spittle rhyming his beard. "He means to join Baratheon. They conspire together to steal my throne. I see it, Pycelle. I see everything." He seized the maester's wrist with clothen fingers. "Would you burn with them? Would any of you?" Pycelle winced at the tightness of the grip. "No, your Grace." Aerys released him, sneer stretching like wax too near a flame. "Then let him go. Let them all go north to die. I will raise a new kingdom on the ashes." He wheeled to a lurking pyromancer robed in green. "How many jars remain?" 4,000, your Grace," the pyromancer answered, voice quivering with reverence. Aerys' smile was a flicker of madness. 4,000 suns to set the world alight. He lifted a clawed hand. "Prepare the vaults beneath the seapeat. When they march south again, fire shall greet them. We shall see if ice can stand against dragonflame." North of the neck, winter's chill rode swift. At Moat Cailin, a thin trickle of refugees, Small folk from Last Hearth and Carhold stumbled through thigh-deep mire to claw at the black basalt gates. They bore no livestock, scant food, and tales of walking corpses that would not burn. Marcher lords sent riders racing up the King's Road. On either side of the swamps, gloom-haunted bogs birthed mists that crawled like living things around tumbled towers. Every bird call, every splash of a frog, sounded like a threat. Some said the very frogs had turned silent, that the creatures of rain and mud had fled. And still, the cold deepened. Ned Stark met Robert at Acorn Water, 2 days' ride south of Winterfell. By then, Robert's force had swelled to 5,000. Stormlords, Marcher lords, and a ragged line of lesser knights, who answered the songs of camaraderie echoing from Robert's great warhammer. Ned brought 300 mounted archers from the Dreadfort, a contingent of Manderley Levy spearmen, an old Riswell heavy horse, steel-ribbed as Dothraki saddles were swift. The meet was solemn, but when Robert singled Ned from the line, his laughter broke like crashing surf. He crushed Ned in an embrace, nearly lifting him off his feet. "Ned, you icy bastard," Robert roared, voice cracking with a joy too raw to be simple greeting. "You better have a plan more subtle than stand and swing, or we'll freeze our fool's bits off before the White Walkers finish us." Ned managed a smile beneath the smothering bear hug. "I should be offended you doubt Stark's subtlety." Robert released him, expression sobering. "Benjen?" Ned shook his head. Robert set his jaw. Silence blossomed, mournful as the dead leaves gusting at their boots. After the camp raised, they stood beneath a tattered tenty-fly lit only by a single iron lantern. Maps spread across a makeshift table, corners pinned by river stones. Sir Brynden Tully pointed to crow-hinked marks. Last Hearth overrun, Deepwood Motte preparing evacuation, Carhold silent for 5 days. Word arrived that the Umbers had taken the bulk of their strength east to the King's Road, intending to hold the Weeping Water. The last river froze solid enough to stride across, and wolves had begun crossing south in huge packs. Robert listened, brow furrowing deeper. Dawn comes late, dusk early. By every sign winter has come in truth, yet the Citadel insists the white ravens will not fly for another year. Either their chains grow loose, or the gods themselves have slipped theirs. Now, Nin? "The North has long memories," Ned said. "We stand at the edge of those memories now." Caitlin sat nearby, darning Rob's cloak, while the boy lord pored over the map with Jon at his side. Jon's eyes gleamed, half fear, half wonder. He whispered to Rob of the tales old Nan had told them, of ancient kings of winter and ice-wrought sorcery. Rob gripped his sword belt with the solemnity of a man twice his 14 years. "We must presume the wall is not merely breached," Brynden said, tapping the map. "It is fallen. That opens the King's Road to the dead. If they move like men, they can march 100 leagues in a fortnight. If they move like shadows..." He shrugged. "We cannot guess." Robert rapped a knuckle against the table. "Then we burn the King's Road behind us." "Not enough pitch in the north," Ned said. "We would only slow them, cost our folk their homes." "We cannot fight an enemy that does not tire," Robert insisted. "Fire and dragonglass kill them, say the ancient accounts," Ned replied softly. "Dragonstone has some dragonglass left. If Rhaegar meets us, we may secure more." "Nay." At the name Rhaegar, Robert looked as if he tasted gall. He turned aside, shoulders nodding. Yet he spoke after a breath. "If the Targaryen bastard shows his pretty face, we'll take his magic rocks. But if he reaches for a crown..." "He will not," Ned said. He hoped. That night, Ned walked the perimeter with Ser Jorah Mormont, son of the former Lord Commander, visiting from Bear Island with 50 sworn swords. Jorah, thick-necked and brooding, spoke little. Yet when Ned voiced fears for Benjen, Jorah gripped his forearm. "My father yet lives," Jorah said. "If the old bear lives, your brother may too. The wall cannot fall so clean, else the gods are crueler than I ever dreamt." Ned thanked him, though no comfort reached his bones. In the distance, greenish ribboned lights danced across the star-staggered sky. Northern lights none alive had seen in decades. They pulsed in silence, voiceless auroras heralding a dirge. 2 days later, riders brought news. White wolves had been sighted near the Dreadfort, eyes blue as glacier melt. They moved in berserk packs, larger than hounds, tearing horses from fences and devouring flesh, leaving behind only frozen bones. Men who had never feared the wild wept at these tales. And still no word from the Watch. At White Harbor, Rhaegar Targaryen disembarked under cover of fog and dawn haze, escorted by Dane's cousin Sir Eric and a narrow-rumped courtier named Galadon, who carried his harp. Lord Wyman Manderley, breadth rivaling the galley's mast, greeted them with proper courtesy but guarded eyes. To Manderley's credit, he did not waste breath on slights. He saw the ships, counted their holds, and set his scribes to check coastal village stores. The winter storm bearing down the Bight would delay any safe southward sailing by weeks. Rhaegar dispatched ravens at once, to Ned's camp, to Robert's vanguard, even to River Run, where Hoster Tully's banners rallied in confusion after receiving two conflicting summons. One from Robert calling all riverlords to arms, and another from Jon Arryn urging them to stand down and fortify against the cold. On the evening after arrival, Rhaegar stood upon the new keep's seaward parapet, cloak lifted by a wind that smelled of frozen brine. He fingered his harp strings, coaxing a low, restless chord. Below, the harbor teemed, fisherfolk loading barrels of smoked cod, blacksmiths forging iron-bound pikes from ships' broken nails, Manderley men gatgarms drilling with green-wrapped pylons, tipped in dragonglass barbs, smelted in Dragonstone's volcano forges. The men worked in near silence, exhaustion already deepening the lines around their eyes. When lamps flicked to life across the harbor, the glow shone faint, as though twilight itself sought to swallow every spark. "Your Grace." Rhaegar turned to see Maester Tyrell, Lord Wyman's round-bellied cousin, wrapped in grey, approaching. Another raven arrived from Winterfell. Rhaegar accepted the scroll. This one bore Robert's sigil as well as Eddard's, crowned stag and direwolf rampant. The royal seal of the Targaryens was pointedly absent. He broke the wax. Winterfell in 3 months ride south. Hold White Harbor at all hazard. Assemble ships. If the Wall's doom flows west, we retreat here. Northerners will not bend a knee, but they will follow you if you stand with us now. Steel your heart. Bring fire. Napabi. Fire. Rhaegar. Let the word roll on his tongue. Dragonfire was all that had made his forefathers kings, yet it had also made monsters of them. Eris brought wildfire, fueled by fear. Rhaegar must bring another flame, one that could warm frozen hearts rather than reduce them to ash. He gazed southward where the moon glimmered on black water. Tell Lord Wyman his harbor must hold. He plucked a cord, listening to the echo. By the old gods, the new, and whatever powers rule deep water, we will make our stand. Lightning flickered, thunder chasing faintly after. Rhaegar thought of Lyanna in her lonely tower, of the child stirring beneath her ribs. He thought of Jon's face when first he'd seen the boy at Harrenhal's tourney. How a single glance could shift the world's axis. He strummed again, letting the music carry the shape of his resolve over the moaning sea. North of Last River, the first full host of the dead met mortal steel. Great Jon Umber, air stiff with frost, led 2,000 roaring men of the Giant's Lance into a snowy glade where shadows moved with solemn hunger. Fires burned behind the Umber line, braziers filled with pitch flinging sparks into the sleet. At first, the enemy appeared as drifting silhouettes, vague, tattered, so slow Umber roared with laughter. His men jeered, banging spears on shields. Then the shapes accelerated, closing the space like a rush of winter wind. Ice-grimmed axes rose and fell with silent precision. Flesh parted. Men screamed. Where blood met snow. Crimson hissed and froze. Umber's nephew rode to Winterfell 3 days later, half-mad, face cross-hatched by claw marks that would not heal. His party numbered 8. They carried the great banner of House Umber sodden with melted snow, its giant breaking free of chains now limp and torn. Word spread. 500 Umber men remained, holding a pass at Weeping Water, buying time with lives measured in heartbeats. And still, the dead surged south. On the first day of the 10th moon, Robert and Ned reached Winterfell. their combined host swelling past 15,000. Behind them marched refugees, smiths and bakers, and boys clutching sticks, ragged columns under dire wolf, stag, trout, sunburst. Women sharpened arrowheads by campfire. Septim Ordain taught frightened girls to brew wildling digestives mixed with torch pine resin that could set bone aflame. The world had overturned. Children prepared war while grown lords lifted prayers like smoke. Inside the ancient gates, Ned showed Robert the crypts, long lines of stone kings with iron swords across their laps. They walked beneath green-grown archways lit by flickering torches. At Lyanna's not yet occupied niche, Robert pressed a palm to the cold stone. He did not weep. His tears had dried many moons ago. But his silence filled the chamber like a dirge. "She should have worn the crown of winter roses at her wedding feast," Robert said, voice low and brittle. "One day I will make Rhaegar bleed for it." Ned laid a hand on his shoulder. "We must meet him first, and the dead with him." Robert grunted. They left the crypts, passing through the slit-open gate into the bailey, where the first winter raven circled overhead, black against an iron sky. A snowflake landed on Ned's glove and lingered longer than it should, ice refusing to melt against warmth that wasn't there. East of the King's Road, the white knife froze solid as iron. Night came faster every evening, and the horizon glowed with a faint auroral shimmer like distant storm fire. Some said it was the reflection of giant bonfires lit by the Northmen. Others whispered those lights were the spirits of unburied dead, drifting south to call their brethren. One afternoon, as Ned convened his war council, a horn blast sounded from the eastern watchtower. 3 notes, each stretched long. The hall fell deathly still. 3 blasts. Ranger returning or a wildling host? No, long years had twisted the code. In ancient days, 3 had meant the others. Now the watch was gone, and meaning itself was treacherous. Ned strode to the battlements, cloak swirling. Below, the gates parted. A single rider slumped in the saddle. The horse's mane was crusted with frost, its hooves leaving brittle prints on stone. As the rider drew beneath torchlight, gasps rippled. Benjen Stark, or what remained of him, sat hunched over a horn, black cloak, shredded. His face was pale as moonlit milk. Yet his eyes, merciful gods, his eyes were gray, not blue. Benjen slipped from the horse, collapsing to his knees. Ned was at his side in a heartbeat, cradling his brother, feeling the unnatural chill that radiated from skin drawn tight as leather. Benjen's lips moved. Ned bent close, straining. "Not dead yet," Benjen whispered, voice thin as rime. They march, giants, white shadows. Castle Black fell by dawn. The wall cracked east to west. I ran south. Forest hides me from them, sometimes. His hand closed around Ned's arm, grip like iron tongs. "You must hold here, or none south survive. Send birds, Dragonstone tall. Tell them, Dragonfire. Inand." Benjen's eyes rolled. His head lolled. Maester Leuven hurried, brandy simmering in a copper cup. But when he pressed it to Benjen's lips, the liquid froze to ice crust. Ned felt his brother's pulse falter. With each beat, the blood moved slower, flesh cooling. He called for hot water, furs, any warmth. But the cold pouring from Benjen devoured everything. At dawn, Benjen Stark still breathed, but his skin had grayed to the hue of wrought iron, and frost traced the veins beneath. Leuven wept softly, scribbling notes for the citadel that would never reach Old Town. Ned sat through the night, gripping Benjen's hand, speaking tales of boyhood laughter beside the white knife. Benjen's lips curved once into a hint of a smile. That morning a raven arrived from White Harbor. Rhaegar was riding. Behind him, a fleet of 12 Dragonsbane galleys set sail to pick up refugees along the coast. Rhaegar carried crates of dragonglass and 3 small casks of wildfire. He vowed to bend knee to no throne until the cold was broken. Robert read the message, hammer resting across his knees. "Let him come," he whispered. Gaze fixed on the far horizon where aurora light danced. If he fights the dead beside me, I will name him brother for one dawn." His fingers tightened around the hat. "But if he looks to crowns while my people die..." His threat drifted off, lost in the hush. Beyond Winterfell's walls, the first snow of true winter began to fall, pale, unending, each flake spinning toward a silent future as the greatest lords of the realm awaited the shadow bearing down from the broken north. "Oh," he say. The wind had teeth by the time Rhaegar Targaryen crossed the barrows south of Widow's Watch. His cloak snapped like a wounded banner while hoarfrost crept in fractals across hardened leather. Men who had marched beneath the dragon for years spoke only in whispers now, as though loud words might draw the notice of something vast and unseen pacing just beyond the veil of frost. Their torches burned low despite fresh pitch, paling to sickly halos before the starving dark. Snow began as a mist of silver dots, then thickened into veils, and soon the world shrank to a tunnel of swirling white that hissed against mail and scale, as if the storm itself were telling secrets. They made camp on a chalk rise dotted with old First Men cairns. The stones poked through snow like broken fingers. Maester Tyrell judged the wind at 30 knots and falling temperature enough to crack wagon wheels by dawn. Yet the prince ordered no shelter beyond oilcloth lintos. "A night in the open will teach us the enemy's breath," he said, words steaming in the bleak air. Sir Eric saw to the watch rotations, while Rhaegar stood alone beneath an ancient weirwood, eyes tilted skyward. Aurora bands rippled overhead, greens and spectral blues pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. At times the lights bent into spearheads aimed directly south, and each time the glow knifed down the horizon, the wind grew colder still. When the first scream broke the hush, it came from the eastern picket. Rhaegar sprinted, sword bare, harp forgotten in the snow. He found a sentry sprawled beside his tipped lantern, body already stiff, every vein showing black against skin blanched white. No blood leaked from the wound at his throat. The flesh had frozen solid before it could flow. 50 yards beyond, a shape retreated into swirling flakes, tall, gaunt, robed in rags that flittered like moth wings. The thing's eyes blazed blue, not the soft cobalt of summer sky, but glacier fire unspoiled by any warmth. Rhaegar felt it fix upon him. Then it turned, footfalls silent, and melted into the storm. His men ringed him, shields locking. No more attacks came that night, yet none slept. When dawn bled watery gray, they found 12 more corpses along the perimeter, each frozen to a rime-armored statue, blades half-drawn. No tracks marked the snow except their own. Sir Eric insisted they burn the dead. Dry wood was scarce. They used oil-soaked saddles and wine. Purple flames guttered low, reluctantly consuming bodies that crackled as ice within burst joints and cheeks. When the pyres finally failed, only half-melted lumps remained, and the stench of cold fat lingered like doom. Rhaegar pushed them hard the next day. Hooves clattered over river ice that boomed like distant drums. Once, a sheet fractured beneath the third baggage cart, swallowing horses whole. The shriek of iron against ice rose and cut off as water closed. 2 men scrambling for purchase were dragged back by comrades wielding pike shafts, but one slipped under, helmet striking the ice's underside with a hollow ring. The shape of his face receded into dark water until only a blur remained, then nothing. They reached the King's Road fork at dusk on the 5th day, and at sunset torches flickered upon the first northern outriders, a manderly banner in the fore, a plump mermaid lifting trident. Behind rode a column of 200 spears, and a dozen white-cloaked men bearing the direwolf sigil, quartered with the crowned stag. The leader urged his horse forward, visor raising to reveal a sharp wolfish face with youth still clinging to the cheeks. Jon Snow reined in beside Rhaegar, breath fogging between them. He named himself, voice catching only once as he said, "My lords Robb and Joffrey." He flushed, correcting in haste. "Prince Joffrey command the southern gate. They sent me to guide you, my prince." Stark courtesy overrode any hesitation. The boy bowed from the saddle, dark curls dusted white. Rhaegar studied him. In another life, He might have claimed the lad as kin openly. Instead he inclined his head, thanked Jon, and signaled the march to resume. They moved beneath ephemeral arches of light that rippled from zenith to zenith, pale green combing through indigo like luminous kelp in black water. By midnight, Winterfell's fossed walls loomed, lanterns bobbing along parapets, every arrow slit glowing ember bright. Inside the great courtyard, a hush fell over thousands of gathered men. Robert stood before the shattered heart-tree shield he once bore at the Trident, hair wild, warhammer, leaning on a knee like an old friend. Ned Stark flanked him, gray eyes unreadable. When Rhaegar dismounted, the only sound was wind skirling through murder holes. Torches sang low. Rhaegar strode forward, sheathing his sword. He paused 3 paces short, bareheaded in the frozen dark, and bent his knee. "I come not for crowns," he said, voice echoing against basalt. "I come for the living." Robert stared long. His knuckles whitened against the hammer's haft. At last he let the iron head thud into snow, reached out, and wrenched Rhaegar to his feet with a grip that shook like a forged bellows. "Rise," he growled. "We stand or fall together. But God's help you if you've lied." "Menin." Ned exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief so deep it carved years from his face. Shouts broke the stillness, first Northmen, then Stormlords, then scattered Reachmen who had ridden for a chance to fight anything but fellow men. The roar climbed, filling the yard with a thunder that made ravens start from their perches. In the noise, Rhaegar leaned close to Robert. "Lyanna is safe," he said, barely a whisper. "I swear it." Robert's jaw tremored, yet he nodded once, curt as a sword stroke. They parted. The yard settled into frantic purpose, tents drawn, banners placed, cooks stoking hearths heavy with onions and dried boar. Far above, auroras coalesced into a shimmering curtain across the vault of night, and some swore they could hear faint music beneath the wind. Benjen Stark lingered between worlds in a tower chamber kept hot by braziers stoked round the clock. Hearth blaze licked granite, yet frost rimmed every stone, and the iron braziers wept condensation that froze before it touched floor. Ned sat beside the bed, speaking softly of childhood pranks and maester lessons, until his voice rasped raw. Benjen's eyes fluttered open in brief pockets of lucidity. Each time he repeated the same words. "In the wood beside the shattered gate, a horn of strange ice. Do not let them sound it again." Lúthien had found no mention of such a horn beyond legend, but he feared to move Benjen lest he snap like brittle glass. Rhaegar visited on the second night after his arrival. He stood over the sickbed in silent regard, then removed a pouch of obsidian dust from his belt, and sprinkled a thin line about the chamber's threshold. A barrier of dragon glass so fine it gleamed black violet. He murmured in Valyrian while doing it. Ned kept his question to himself. Whatever ritual it was, Benjen's fitful shivering eased the moment the circle closed. Frost no longer formed on the walls. Ned stared at Rhaegar suspiciously, but the prince only bowed and left without explanation. The war council gathered in the solar once used by Lord Rickard. 20 chairs ringed the map table. Robert and Ned sat opposing, with Rhaegar at Ned's right. Sir Arthur Dayne stood behind a shoulder of Rhaegar's chair, dawn a pale line reflecting candle glow. Catelyn, Willa Manderly, Mage Mormont, and Garland Tyrell attended, the last having slipped north disguised as a sellsword to support his aunt's maester. Knotted among them were stout commanders, Greatjon's nephew Osric Umber, Sir Brynden Tully, Sir Barristan Selmy, and Lord Corbray out of the Vale. Maester Lúthien unrolled fresh parchment marked by raven quill. Observations from riders, scouts, and terrified farmers. The dead hunted in packs now, moving by day under a clouding cloud, by night under any sky. They struck outlying steads as far south as the rills, then vanished before torches and steel arrived. Whites outnumbered others perhaps 100 to 1, but a single other could cut through 5 armored knights unless checked by dragon-glass spears or a flame-kissed sword. Giants marched with them, frost-crusted and driven by a will not their own, smashing holds, lifting gates from hinge posts as though they weighed no more than wicker. The world south of Moat Cailin was not yet lost, but each day the line crept closer. On maps, the encroachment looked like ink slowly spilling over parchment. Rhaegar traced a finger along the King's Road. "If the enemy reaches the neck before we hold Moat Cailin, they can sweep into the Riverlands. Their numbers grow every time they kill. Each new corpse rises in service." Robert thumped the table. "Then we meet them north of the neck. Give them fire. Make a wall of their ashes." Osric Umber barked. "Ashes do nae last in this wind, Mord. And there's naught to burn but snow and frozen sod." Garland Tyrell, face pale, suggested field forges to fashion dragonglass blades on the march. Rhaegar shook his head. "Dragonglass cannot be tempered in simple charcoal. It becomes brittle and useless. We need obsidian points fixed to ashwood shafts, and we need wildfire." At that, all eyes turned to Robert. The king's expression soured. The pyromancers sent only 300 jars to Gulltown before Aaron closed the roads. They hoard the rest for Ares. Even if Stannis Pre's Dragonstone vaults open, we'll have 1,000 jars at most. It burns hot, aye, but one slip and we torch our own lines. Barristan cleared his throat. "Your Grace, we can form shield walls with obsidian infantry behind. The enemy's first rush will meet steel. When they pile on, we bring the fire in small casks thrown high. The glass then finishes stragglers." Mage Mormont slammed fist to table. "Better still, dragons. Not stonefire, but living flame. Berotor." Silence hung. Rhaegar closed his eyes, remembering summer dreams of pale wings and black scales. But there were no dragons left. Only the stone eggs in Dragonstone's nursery, cold as tomb hearts. Unless he wondered, but kept silent. Ned finally spoke. "We cannot wait here and hope walls suffice. We must meet the dead on ground of our choosing. The Barrowlands beyond Long Lake offer rolling terrain for cavalry and room for wildfire screens." Osric spat. "Aye, and little cover if we're flanked by whites through the pines. That is why we bring flame," Rhaegar said. "Strip those forests, fell every dead tree. Leave no shade for shadows." Catelyn raised a brow. "You would burn the north." Rhaegar's voice softened. "I would burn half the world to save the rest." Robert met that answer with a grunt that might have been approval. Or warning. Lewin spoke into the tension. Lists of supply, barley stores, smith tools. Horses needed oats, men needed preserved meats, children in Wintertown needed cloaks. War against the cold ground, the logistical bones of kingdoms into splinters. Still, orders were inked, messengers chosen. The council adjourned past midnight, exhaustion written on every face. Deep beneath Winterfell, in the forgotten crypt where Brandon the shipwright once kept relics of driftwood kings, Jon Snow crouched beside an old stone box. Benjen's delirious words haunted him. Horn of strange ice. If such a thing did lie near the shattered gate, why had Uncle risked all to retrieve it? Jon turned the box iron hasp. The lid grated, revealing burlap and layers of rotted velvet. Inside lay a coil of pale material, ridged, translucent. Some beast's tusk or ancient conch, narrow at the mouth, widening to a bell rim, etched in runes so faint they seemed frost-scratched. Jon brushed dust away and felt a chill run the length of his spine. Footsteps behind made him whirl. Rhaegar stood at the archway with a lantern. "Where did you find that?" Jon rose slowly. "Buried under broken shields." "Why is it cold?" Rhaegar approached, lantern glow painting his features in shadow. "Because it is not of this world, Jon." He knelt, fingertips drifting over the horn without touching. "Legend names it Joramun's breath, the Horn of Winter. It was said to raise giants from the earth and shake the wall to ruin. But the true horn, if there was one, must have shattered by now." He looked up. "This is likely a child of that myth." Jon sensed the prince believed otherwise. "If the others sounded again," Uncle said. Rhaegar rose. "Then we must never let them take it. Come." They carried the horn to Ned. Stark eyes widened as he saw it. Recognition or dread, Jon could not tell. Ned ordered it encased in an iron-bound chest, lined with dragonglass dust, emitted by Rhaegar's men. 4 guard captains swore vows on old gods, new, and the seven-pointed star to die before they surrendered the key. Snow fell thicker with each dawn. Tracks vanished in moments. Sentries stood double shifts. Hounds shivered in straw. Ravens iced their wings to the rookery ledge and croaked in misery. On the sixth morning, scouts returned from the Barrowlands bearing grim news. Umber's remaining 500 were wiped out beneath the weeping waterfalls. The dead numbered in the tens of thousands and advanced in three prongs, two along the hills east and west, one massing on the King's Road. If they held course, they would converge on Winterfell within 12 days. Robert called banners at once, ordering every man able to heft spears south to the ridgeline at Barrowton. Ned mustered Karstark, Tallheart, and Risewell levies to hold the flank near Widow Watchpines, while Rhaegar rode northeast with Dane and 500 dragonmen to harry the lead element, slowing them for fire trenches to be laid. Catelyn oversaw evacuation of Wintertown. Maester Luwin remained to treat the wounded. Jon Snow begged leave to ride with Rhaegar. Ned refused at first, but Jon pressed. He could scout on Ghost's silent paws, he argued, navigating the drifts none other could cross. Ned saw his son's determination, or perhaps Lyanna's stubborn spark, and relented, on condition Jon carry a dragon-glass dagger tied at the wrist and never let the prince stray from sight. That afternoon, the prince's vanguard quit Winterfell by the Hunter's Gate, torches flaring against swirling snow, Jon trotting beside Arthur Dane. The watchers on the wall saw specks of flame bob across white, until all was storm again. The Dead's outriders, formerly wildlings by their garb, hit Rhaegar's forward scouts at dusk 2 days later. Steel lopped limbs that kept moving, severed heads that gnashed with blackened teeth until crushed under boot. Rhaegar drew red song. Valyrian steel once gifted by Dark Sister's lost lineage, and hewed through whites in sweeping arcs that left violet motes sparking along the blade. Dane fought like nothing of mortal flesh, dawn ringing with a high note as each cut turned white bones to silver dust. Yet for every corpse felled, 2 more lurched from the storm. Jon's arrows found eyes and hearts, but still bodies advanced. Only when a lit brand arced overhead and burst against frozen ground did the whites recoil, shrieking, faces cracking under sudden heat. Fire, always fire. They retreated to a ridge where Rhaegar set lines of pitch-filled trenches. Jon and 6 spearwives poured lamp oil, while dragonmen sparked fuse cords. Trenches ignited in sheets of orange that battled snowflakes midair. Night burned bright as noon. Yet through the smoke, they glimpsed shapes, pale figures gliding just beyond flame, cold eyes reflecting fire without warmth. Others waited, patient as glaciers, for fuel to wane. Rhaegar dispatched Jon on Ghost to carry word to Ned. Dead massing, trenches holding for the moment, but numbers endless. Jon left at moonrise, storm at his back, breath freezing on beard stubble he scarcely noticed. Snow muffled hoofbeats, but Ghost padded ahead, crimson eyes cutting swirling veil. They made 15 miles by dawn's gray, pausing only to avoid a silent file of whites trudging south across a frozen stream. Ghost flattened, hackles rising. Jon knocked arrow after arrow, but did not loose, too many to fight. They slipped through birch stands, ice creaking underfoot, hearts hammering in unison. Just past midday, a distant horn boomed, long low, echoing like thunder inside stone. The sound vibrated Jon's ribs, churned the air under Ghost's fur. He knew at once it was not Rhaegar's war signal. This was something older and more terrible. Trees shivered, snow cascaded from branches. Jon spurred on. At twilight, Winterfell's towers emerged, dim silhouettes behind storm shroud. He galloped through the Hunter's Gate shouting for the guard. Breathless, he knelt before Ned and Robert in the yard, relaying both Rhaegar's message and the ominous horn. Ned's face whitened, Robert gripped his hammer. Luwin stepped forward, voice shaking. If the horn of winter has sounded, legends claim the wall falls utterly. Earth shakes. It already has, Ned said. This may open every barrow from here to Skagos. Worse, it could wake the giants beneath the ice rivers. We must ride tonight. Robert agreed, calling armorers. Catelyn gathered healers to the keep's lower court and kissed her husband once with eyes shining. I will hold the gate, she whispered. Ned pressed his forehead to hers. "Guard our children," he said. Though both knew the boys rode at his side come dawn. They marched under a sky curdled with bruised purple clouds, lanterns bobbing like fireflies in a sea of white. Karstark outriders guided them across Wolf's Run, where ice sheets snapped beneath cavalry weight, sending half a company plunging waist-deep into slush that froze solid around greaves before men could heave free. Robert ordered axes to crack each man loose, but 4 lost toes before dawn. At midday, they met refugees from Barrington fleeing south, women with babes, men dragging sledges laden with what grain they dared spare. Some collapsed in relief at Robert's column, believing salvation had come. The king pressed coin into palms and urged them back to Winterfell. On the third dawn, they crested a ridge and saw Rhaegar's line below. 2 miles of trenches. Their fuel burned to ash now, leaving only charred smears across snowfields. Beyond, whites clustered, black shapes in an ocean of white, motionless, awaiting the sun's final sinking. Behind them, far larger shapes loomed, half hidden in flurries. Giants taller than keeps, skin lucus, eyes pits of summer glacial melt. At their center, mounted upon something that might once have been an elk, but now was twisted bone and frost, sat an other in armor of moonlit mirror ice. It held no banner, needed none. Its presence commanded silence so deep, Robert felt his horse's heartbeat rattle his own ribs. Ned ordered signal fire. Rhaegar's men saw, cheered, though the sound carried weak on the wind. Robert formed 3 battle wedges. Stormlords right, Northmen center, Dragonmen left. Barristan took the vanguard of knights plated head to heel, their lances crowned with dragon glass. Osric Umber, grim with grief, led foot behind shields hooped with iron. Wildfire crews stood in the gaps, torches primed. The sun sank into a blood-orange slit between clouds. A hush as profound as funeral vaults shrouded the ridge. Then the horn sounded again, closer now, a roar that churned both snow and bowels. Trees bent, men clutched helms. The giant line surged. Robert raised hammer to sky. "For the dawn," he roared and spurred. The ground shook as 20,000 men thundered down slope. Arrows hissed overhead, obsidian-tipped, finding white chests that shattered like glass. Firepots arced, trailing sparks that bloomed into green sunbursts upon impact, lighting the snow with eerie emerald waver. Whites ignited, flailing as fire raced up sinew to blackened bone. Yet the giants came on. A boulder the size of a cottage hailed from their line, smashing into a shield wall, scattering bodies like ninepins. Another giant lifted a frozen pine whole and swung it like a staff, swatting cavalry and horse both into mangled heaps. Robert angled toward the great beasts, warhammer spinning. Barristan and Dane flanked, blades flashing in aurora-tinged gloom. Dragonglass spears jabbed deep into icy limbs. Cracks spidered up giant arms, white flakes cascading like sleet. One giant toppled with a roar that rattled every bone in Robert's body. Yet 3 more pressed on. Farther left, Rhaegar sang a low Valyrian battle hymn beneath breath, sword-ringing harmonic counterpoints as it cleaved white necks. Jon Snow trailed him, ghost darting into hamstring fallen foes, shaggy coat blazing white amid gore. They fought toward the other on its skeletal elk. Each time Rhaegar's gaze brushed the figure, his breath iced, lungs burning. The other raised a hand. Spears of blue fire, icy javelins, materialized and launched, skewering 2 dragonmen. Their screams died mid-air as bodies froze instantly. Dane saw, broke from Robert's side, and sprinted across churned snow, dawn raised like herald of the sun. Arthur carved a path through whites, each stroke blasting shards of frozen flesh. He reached the other's guard. 4 lesser shadows wielding frost swords. Dawn met the first blade in a flare of light, so bright, men cried out. The frost sword shattered. The white dissolved in a puff of drifting snow. Dane spun, continuing the dance. Viper's steps passed down from Old Dorne. The second shadow fell, then the third. But the fourth parried, twisting weapon to slide along Dawn and stab. Ice kissed Dane's shoulder. Frost bloomed upon steel and tendon alike. He gasped, hacked the shadow in half, but arm hung useless, encased in rime. Rhaegar joined, red song crashing against the other's elk mount, splitting bone antlers. The beast collapsed, leaving its rider to glide weightless onto snow. It faced Rhaegar, sword of crystal forming in a gesture both sinuous and terrifying. Rhaegar lunged. The other parried with flicker-fast moves that rang like chimes. Each clash sent chill waves through the prince, dousing muscle and ache. Jon circled, looking for opening, dragonglass dagger ready. He saw Dane stagger to one knee, arm blackening under frost. The other flitted aside, sword cleaving air in arcs that left ice dust wakes. Rhaegar faltered, knees quivering. Jon sprang, burying dagger in the other's back. It screeched, a sound of cracking lakes under moon. Blue eyes flared, then shattered as the crystal sword fell from numb grip. The other dissolved into a cyclone of powdered snow that whirled skyward, scattering on the wind. Its sudden vanishing sent a ripple through the white ranks. For a heartbeat they paused, vacant eyes voided of command. Robert bellowed for wildfire. Crews hurled casks into the dead clumps. Green blooms erupted, mirrored on iron helms, turning night emerald. But respite lasted mere moments. Whites rallied under another unseen mine. Jon knelt beside Dane, slashing frost away from wounded shoulder with red song, its Valyrian heat granting momentary thaw. Arthur exhaled shaky breath. "Do what must be done," he murmured. Rhaegar pressed his palm to the knight's brow. "Not yet, old friend," he whispered. Trumpets on the ridge signaled Roger Reswell's heavy cavalry charge. Fresh horses pounding, lances leveled. They crashed into the white flank, staggering the line. Fire arrows streaked overhead. Whites toppled into burning trenches dug earlier by Rhaegar's sappers, and now reignited by braziers hauled forward mid-fight. Amid chaos, a second horn blast, different, booming down from far north. Snow squalls thickened, blotting sky. Robert felt the hair stir on his neck as cold surged in, fiercer than anything prior. Through whipping white he glimpsed silhouettes on the northern ridge. 10 shapes, tall, each crowned with icy spikes, other lieutenants commanding separate wings. At their center a taller figure materialized, black cloak swirling around armor of night glass. Its sword shone ebony tipped in blue fire, the Night's King if ancient tales held truth. The air stilled. Every torch snuffed in an instant. Green wildfire hissed out, steam roiling. Darkness swallowed sound. Only aurora light remained, washing battlefield in phantasmal hues. Rhaegar shouted a phrase in bright Valyrian. The dragonglass dust in his pouch flared crimson and burst upward like sparks. He hurled the pouch high. It exploded, scattering incandescent shards that hovered mid-air, tiny suns resisting the unnatural dark. Whites recoiled. Robert rallied men, hammer grinding against shield rims. Ned pressed forward, ice raised, its massive Valyrian edge gleaming. Jon watched the Night's King lift his sword to the sky. The aurora bent toward its tip. A spear of crackling blue descended through clouds, striking the blade with a thunder that shook marrow. Lightning spiderwebbed across snow, animating fallen bodies anew. Whites once burned reignited, green fire mixing with azure arcs, risen again in grotesque second life. Panic rippled. Horses reared, men tripped. Rhaegar clenched teeth. "We break the horn," he shouted. "Elsie raises the world." Ned understood at once. Jormungand's horn still hidden in ironwood chest, back at Winterfell. If the Night's King seized it, the North's barrows would vomit forth every corpse since the Age of Heroes. Robert cursed. Then someone must get it away. Now. Jon stepped forward. "Ghost and I," he said. Ned's protest met the boy's steady gaze. "I know the tunnels. We can be there and back faster than any rider." Ned hesitated, then fastened Ice's leather grip into Jon's palm. "Take the sword. Keep it close." Jon nodded, gripping the weighty great blade awkwardly across shoulders. He whistled. Ghost bounded through drifts. Together they slipped south, leaving battle's roar to wane behind them. Winterfell's courtyards roiled with frantic preparation. Blacksmith forges glowed, nurses boiled wine, refugees crowded low halls. Catelyn patrolled ramparts with crossbow, cloak whipping. She saw Jon and Ghost streak from trees, looming shapes behind. She raced down, meeting Jon at the smithy door. Words spilled. Rhaegar's warning, the horn's doom. Catelyn fetched Maester Luwin. They dragged the chest from vault. Jon hefted its weight onto a sled, lashed to Ghost's harness. In his other hand he gripped ice, the blade's runes glowing faint crimson in storm's gloom. They left through the postern unnoticed. Snow devoured tracks. Jon urged Ghost northeast, following deer paths where drifts lay shallow. They crested a hill, then froze. Whites blocked their route, a ragged semicircle of frostbitten men and women, faces half gnawed, eyes burning blue. The sled skidded, chest rocking. Ghost snarled. Hackles ridge. Jon raised ice, blade hardly lighter than terror inside ribs. The first white lurched. Jon swung. Ice cleaved torso, bone parted crisp like crusted bread. A second grabbed sled rope. Ghost leapt, jaws closing on wrist, crunch of shattering ice. Jon pivoted, sweeping broad back of sword into third white's legs. They toppled. He hacked, severing spine. Breath plumed white. Each exhale tore throat raw. More emerged. He could not fight them all. Jon glanced at horn chest. Iron rings sturdy. He remembered Bran's climbing rope lessons. He slashed harness straps, kicked sled downhill. Chest careened, bouncing. Whites followed the movement. Jon whistled. Ghost darted after sled, biting its side to steer. Jon turned, sprinting for a ravine he knew. Old wolf den beneath leaning birch. He dove, snow swallowing him. Whites thundered past above, chasing sled's shadow. Inside den's narrow throat Jon crouched, chest heaving. White's screams echoed distant. When noise faded, he crawled out, retracing path. Ghost waited beside sled at ravine bottom. Chest jammed against drift. Rope bits in his jaws signaled success. Jon scratched blood-flecked fur. Good. They resumed, hugging marsh channels. 2 hours later, they saw flicker of green fire on horizon, battle still raging. Jon hefted sled rope. Shoulder muscles shrieked. They pressed on. Near midnight, they reached ridge above battlefield. Snow charnel lay churned. Fire pits sputtered. Human cries mingled with unearthly shrieks. Jon spotted Ned rallying near Broken Standard, Robert hammering a giant kneeling, Rhaegar dueling a lieutenant shimmering sapphire. Yet the Night's King remained beyond, power coursing in burning arcs. If he reached this horn, Jon angled wide. He and Ghost slipped through chaos, sled bumping over corpse mounds. Halfway, Ghost stopped, ears flat. Ahead, another detached from swirling snow, a female form maybe, slender, blade thin as despair. It glided toward them. Jon dropped rope, raised ice. Sweat froze in lashes. The other studied him. Its eyes flicked to chest, recognition glinting. It moved, faster than thought. Jon barely parried, felt shock of cold jolt arms. Ghost darted to flank. The other spun, foot sweeping wolf aside. Jon lunged. Ice met crystal blade, sparks of blue and red shooting. Edge slid shrieking, locking crossguard. Ice heavier, but other stronger through unnatural chill. Jon twisted hips, drove heel, shoved. Lock broke, ice sliced through knee. The limb sheared, the other fell, yet flowed back up like liquid frost. It hissed, sound like cracking glaze. Jon saw chest rope within reach. Idea sparked. He seized rope, swung chest up, smashing horncase into other's midsection. Dragon glass dust lining spilled, scattering across enemy's torso. The dust burned crimson where it touched crystal skin. Others shrieked, body fracturing in starburst shards. It collapsed, dissolving to drifting snowflakes. Jon gasped, chest pounding, black dots swimming in vision. Ghost whined but rose. Together they heaved sled remainder toward Ned's standard. Robert saw first, eyes widening. He charged whites aside, clearing path. Ned met Jon, took rope. "Well done, son." Jon smiled wearily. Rhaegar joined, face streaked with soot and frostburn. "We must destroy it," he said. Robert shook head. "We keep from monster. Do you know it will harm them if shattered?" Rhaegar's jaw set. "I know any blade may cut both bearer and foe. Better risk unknown than gift certain doom." He drew red song poised over box. Jon stepped forward. "Wait," Uncle said. "Do not let them sound it again. May be cracked. It cannot sound. Now." Ned looked between them. "Break the mouthpiece. Leave body intact. That denies use yet preserves. Insurance." Robert grunted. He braced horn, hammer raised, tapped once, twice, then swung a measured blow. Jericho clear crack split air. Horn's narrow tip snapped, tumbling. No quake followed, yet distant ridge lights flickered. Night's King paused, turned altered stare upon them. Tension thickened. Then the aurora above dimmed, swirling patterns disrupted. Whites in immediate vicinity staggered, uncertain. Rhaegar exhaled. It worked. Battle momentum shifted. Northmen pressed harder, dragonglass spears punching. Wildfire crews reignited trenches. The Night's King raised sword, but energy coalesced slower now, sputtering. Robert seized opening. "With me!" he shouted, charging giant still flailing. Knights followed. A breach in dead phalanx open. Rhaegar, Ned, Jon plunged through, heading straight for the Night's King. Approach felt like wading against tide of winter. Air crystallized, breath froze mid-exhale. Ice webs crawled across mail links. Yet they pressed, hacking whites, ducking clumsy giant swings. 50 yards, 30, 20. Night's King stood unmoved, watching, blade raised crossbody. Ghost bounded left, snapping white hamstrings. Jon flanked right, ice poised. Rhaegar centered, red steel singing. Night's King moved. Too quick. Blade met Rhaegar's. Spark sprayed. Ned swung. Crystal blade parried, showering shards. Jon lunged. Ice bit shoulder but fracture sealed in instant. Frost aura lashed, blasting them back. Ghost leapt, jaws aimed at throat. Struck mid-air by frost wave, sent yelping. Robert burst through, hammer overhead, roaring to shake gods. He brought steel down with world-breaking force. Night's King raised sword to block. The impact rang like cathedral bells. Crystal split from hilt to tip. Blade shattered. A burst of blue light erupted, staggering all. Night's King reeled, cloak flailing. Rhaegar saw a chance. He drew a wildfire jar from belt, smashed at King's feet. Green inferno consumed. Night's King screamed, voice of grinding glaciers. Flames wrapped him, flickering emerald shadows across armor that bubbled, cracked, collapsed into smoking heap. At once, battlefield quieted. Whites froze mid-fight, then sagged, lifeless. Giants toppled like felled towers, shaking ground in slow thunder. Snow fluttered down in sudden hush. No wind, no roar, only soft rustle as flakes kissed char and flesh. Aurora curtains flickered out one by one until only stars remained, distant and cold, but harmless. Silence held. Men panted, staring at the now still corpses around them. Robert dropped to one knee, hammer digging furrow. Rhaegar leaned on sword, shoulders trembling. Ned wiped gore from ice. Jon limped to Ghost, stroking burned fur. Wolf whined but licked his hand. Behind, dawn's first rose gold seeped under east clouds. Light touched field, painting crimson-scarred snow pink and gold. Fire still smoldered green where jars had burst. Yet colors now looked almost gentle. Robert rose, breathing steam. He surveyed destruction, then faced Rhaegar. Words failed a while. Finally he extended hand. "Brother." Rhaegar clasped it, grip firm though weary. Ned looked on, a slow smile breaking frost of grief. Around them, soldiers and small folk raised ragged cheers, soft at first, growing until valley echoed with spent triumph. Yet even as jubilation spread, Ned's gaze wandered north. Beyond shattered armies, the horizon shimmered pale blue, a wall of fog retreating, leaving gray tundra tide. Victory won a reprieve, not peace. He squeezed Jon's shoulder. "Winter may break," he said, voice low, "but another will come." Jon followed his stare, understanding. Rhaegar stepped beside them, cloak rustling. "Then we guard the realms together," he said. Robert grunted assent, eyes drifting east where King's Landing lay. A kingdom both endangered and delivered. Snowflakes still drifted, but dawn's warmth began to melt the top layer, drop by drop, each bead catching sun like tiny crystals. They sparkled upon broken horn fragments at Jon's feet. A reminder fragile as ice that even legends can die, and so can be forged anew. Ash fell with the snow 2 mornings after the battle, a fine gray veil drifting down from the gutted watchfires and the pyres raised through the night. It mingled with the whiter flakes until neither could be distinguished, and so cloaked the great field in a pall that smelled of pine tar and burnt marrow. Men walked slowly among the corpses, speaking in murmurs as if the dead might rouse again should any voice grow too bold. They toppled blackened giants with pulley teams. They heaped shattered wights in pits and salted each trench with dragonglass dust before the torches kissed the pile. No cheers greeted this labor. Only coughing, the clang of shovels, and the dull rasp of steel on bone. Robert Baratheon rose early despite a cracked rib and a bruise the size of a helm spreading over his flank. He stalked the perimeter with hammer, slung across his back, head bowed beneath the weight of smoke and victory. Each corpse he passed seemed to draw some secret from him. The price of vengeance, the debt owed when wrath found purpose beyond the man who carried it. At sunrise he halted beside a felled giant, its skull caved where his hammer had landed the final stroke. Frost had webbed the wound, sealing gray brains in a glittering shell. The king pressed gloved hand to the frozen bone. "I thought to hate you," he told it softly, voice hoarse. "Turns out hate isn't strong enough a thing to face the dark." The giant gave no answer, but Robert nodded as though it had and rejoined the living. Rhaegar Targaryen spent the dawn in silence atop a low ridge overlooking the ruins, fingers resting on the strings of his battered harp. He did not play. The wind keened about the instrument, and sometimes the strings vibrated to that unseen bow, releasing thin, mournful notes lost before they reached the tents below. When the sun cleared the hill, he turned, cloak sweeping a half-circle through ash, and made his way toward the healers' pavilions, where Arthur Dayne lay. Inside, the knight's cot sat beneath a double layer of oiled canvas. A brazier glowed red, but cold clung to Arthur's limbs like a lover too possessive to release. Frost scars patterned his shoulder in branching white lines that no healer's balm could warm. His breath puffed slow and shallow. Rhaegar knelt, touch hovering just above gauze. Arthur stirred. "How many times," he rasped, "have you come to my bedside, my prince?" "Each morning," Rhaegar said. "You have not missed a sunrise yet, my friend." Dayne's lips twitched. "See that I do not miss tomorrows, and I will forgive you dragging me to war. You dragged me, as I recall. It seems I was worth saving." Arthur's eyelids fluttered closed again. "Then see me through another dawn," he whispered. "After that, let the gods take their tithe." Outside, Robb Stark broke ice from the water barrels alongside Jon Snow. They worked in silence at first, cleaving frozen lids with short axes. Ghost loped the perimeter, muzzle caked white, but otherwise unhurt. When the last barrel was unsealed, Robb rested on the haft of his axe and studied the sky where faint green wraiths still shimmered, though the battle's heart had stilled. "Do you think it truly finished?" he asked. Jon followed the trembling auroras, breath clouding. "I think the dead are gone for now," he said. The weight of ice, the ancestral Stark blade, still pressed his back. He had drawn it first light to inspect the edge, and though the blade glimmered flawless as ever, the memory of swinging it through creatures of frost made his hands ache. "Rhaegar means to march south," Robb said after a moment. "Father spoke of it last night. King's Landing must be dealt with before Aerys unleashes his pyromancers." Jon wiped frost from his gloves. "Robert will not suffer Aerys to hold the throne a day longer. Not after what he did to the Starks and Elias' children. He paused, uncertain how much of the prince's confession he should reveal even to Robb. Rhaegar has debts to settle of his own. Robb's smile was bitter. We all do. They lifted water sloshing with chips of ice and carried slop buckets to the horses. The beasts stamped and whickered, made restless by sense of death that would take weeks to fade. Jon paused by a dapple-gray mare that belonged to Sir Barristan. The animal's flank bore shallow rents from a white's claws, stitched hurriedly. He stroked its neck. A horn pealed near the command tents, one solid note that raised every head. Robb and Jon exchanged looks, set their buckets aside, and hurried upslope. Near the charred stump of an ancient oak, Ned Stark waited with Robert and Rhaegar beneath a canvas, spread strung from wagon poles. Around them clusters of bannermen pressed close. Brynden Tully, Willem Manderley, Mage Mormont, Barristan Selmy, even old Lord Wylas Fenn from the lonely Barrow Hall. Jon and Robb slipped in near the rear. Ned's voice carried despite rawness. We have burned the corpses, shattered what iced steel we found. Scouting parties report no sign of moving shadows for 40 miles north. The wall, what remains, lies silent. Rhaegar stepped forward. The realm east and south still lies in peril, he said. My father masses wildfire under the sept of Baelor, under the guild halls, beneath every square of King's Landing. Should Robert's host march on the capital, Ares will burn city and citizen alike. Murmurs rippled. Robert's jaw hardened. Then we take the city before he strikes the torch. Rhaegar spread his hands. The pyromancers hide in catacombs. Only the keys of the Alchemist Guild and the king's own signet can release the final locks. We must seize them both together or disable the vault triggers. Any misstep could ignite. Robert's dark scowl landed on Sir Barristan Tot. Stand fast, Selmy. You've served both father and son. Whose orders will you follow? Barristan bowed, white cloak hanging ragged at the hem. I swore my life to the crown, your grace. The man on that throne now is a threat to every innocent soul in his care. Command me, and I will see those vaults torn open. Den Derwen. Robert's anger cooled a little. Good. But I mean to end this swiftly. My Stormlords march on the King's Road at dawn. Ned cleared his throat. Your grace, our folk are exhausted. The North needs weeks to bury its dead. See to harvest, men torn fields? Robert turned, frustration obvious. Every hour we tarry is another hour the Mad King shifts wildfire. If he flees south, he'll leave a smoking ruin behind. His fist struck the wagon post. Snow shook loose from the canvas roof. Catelyn Stark stepped from between torches at the tent's edge, face flushed from cold. Robert, she said softly, the North rode for you before, when vengeance alone guided. Now they would march another 1,000 leagues to save strangers they have never met. They will do it, but not without hope of rest. She drew a breath. Give them one moon's turning. Let the injured mend so they can ride. Rhaegar inclined his head. In that time I can sail to Dragonstone, muster loyal retainers who will turn against my father rather than see the city burn. We may have the pyromancer's ranks before we reach the capital. Robert exhaled, shoulders loosening. A moon then, he relented. But no more. When the horn of sunrise sounds on the 30th dawn, every banner south. Agreement murmured through the gathered lords. Plans unfurled. Ravens to Jon Arryn in the Eyrie, to Mace Tyrell in Highgarden, to Dorne where Prince Lewin's death still rankled, but hatred of fire-mad kings might outweigh old scars. As scribes hurried to their tasks, Jon noticed Rhaegar's gaze flick once toward the northwest, where a humble maester's tent stirred in the wind. He remembered what the prince had confided earlier in hushed tones. Lyanna was alive, hidden at the Tower of Joy. If Rhaegar meant to sail east, when would he fetch her? And what place might she hold when crowning ended? That night, Jon walked the picket line alone, ghost ranging ghost-like ahead. The air crackled, still thick with unseen power, like the hush before lightning. He passed freshly dug trenches filled with charred bone. Sparks from smoldering ash rose, caught on the wind, then died. At the northern end of camp, A crude cairn marked the place where Benjen Stark's body now lay. He had slipped away just after sunset, breath dwindling to a frost wisp on Ned's arm. Jon stood before the mound, stone silent. No words came. Only when Ghost pressed cold nose to his hand did he move on. At a fork in the track he found Rhaegar wrapped in sable, staring at the horizon where the shattered wall had once glimmered. Jon halted, uncertain. The prince spoke first. "You reminded me of my brother today on the field." "I did nothing compared to you," Jon said. Rhaegar shook his head. "You rose against another armed with naught but trust and a blade too heavy even for your father. Courage unseen is the purest." Jon could not meet those violet eyes long. He studied his boots. "What becomes of the North now?" he asked. "We saved the realm, but our land bleeds. Harvests frozen, holds ruined. The realm owes the North a debt," Rhaegar said quietly. "And debts must be paid if kingdoms are to mend. My dream is a peace forged from gratitude, not fear." His gaze flicked to the aurora still whispering overhead. "The sky remembers. Men must do the same." Jon opened his mouth, stopped. "The wall. Should we rebuild it?" Rhaegar smiled faintly. "A wall built of fear will always crumble when fear grows thin. Yet a wall of duty, that may stand." He laid a hand on Jon's shoulder. "Perhaps men who know both realms, north and south, should guard that duty." Later, in Ned's command tent, Jon found his father hunched over charts. Hooded lanterns cast gold rings on parchment, highlighting new ink lines, marking southern routes. Ned glanced up, eyes shadowed. "Sit," he said. Jon obeyed. After a moment, Ned spoke again. "The prince will take ship soon and Robert will ride. War is not done, it simply shifted shape. I have petitioned the lords to swear you as my steward and commander of scouts. In my absence you will keep Winterfell." Jon's pulse jumped. "Father, I am a Snow." "Snow no longer," Ned interrupted. He withdrew a sealed scroll, slid it across. Jon read his name inked bold beside the direwolf of Stark. The words Lord Robert Baratheon etches at the bottom. A decree of legitimization, bearing royal seal. Tears pricked Jon's eyes. Ned squeezed his forearm. "There are truths still to tell," Ned said softly. "But not tonight. Lie down, rest. Darker roads wait." Jon left tent fuddled by wonder and sorrow. Somewhere beyond, men toasted the fallen with mulled wine that tasted of ash. Ghost trotted beside him, amber eyes gleaming as though the wolf already knew secrets still hidden. A fortnight later, a fleet of Targaryen banners unfurled above White Harbor. 12 great galleys bore the three-headed dragon in crimson, sails patched where arrow holes had been stitched on dark nights. Crowds lined the quays. Small folk of the north, fishermen in seal fur, manderly knights with mermaids bright in pale morning. They watched Rhaegar descend the gangplank in woolen cloak, clasped by a ruby brooch, not the jeweled breastplate of his old tourney days. Ned Stark greeted him with forearm grip. Robb and Jon stood at either side in ringmail still dented from war. Dock crews carted crates of dragon glass aboard, each marked with the sigil of House Stark. Rhaegar supervised as though each obsidian shard were a vow. Before the sun reached its peak, sails billowed, ropes creaked, and the prince's fleet slipped out across the icy bight, bound for Dragonstone. From the seawall, Jon watched until the ships dwindled to black motes on silver. As they vanished into mist, he thought he heard faint music, harp strings plucked by unseen wind, and shivered though the day remained still. With Rhaegar gone, Robert pressed the host south to Moat Cailin. The ruined fortress of basalt columns still jutted from endless bog like broken fangs. Engineers bent themselves to clearing the causeway of white debris. Robert spent spare hours sparring with his bannermen, seeking to drown worry and sweat. Even laughter sounded brittle between the stone towers where watchers once scanned for wildling raiders, never nightmares of ice. One evening Ned found Robert alone atop the tallest column, gazing south across the fens. The king did not look around as Ned climbed. "Arya will hate me," Robert murmured when Ned reached him, "and Sansa will fear me. But I must bring their mother near court." "Namatai," Ned swallowed. "You mean to name Catelyn queen?" Robert barked a mirthless chuckle. Gods, no. The dogs of rumor would love that twist. No. Lyanna's grave lies empty and my wedding vows bind me still. Yet she is gone. I must choose another path. The realm needs a mother's hand. He turned at last, face weary. I will ask Catelyn to serve as Queen Regent until a proper match can be found. Ned blinked. And what place would that leave me? Hand, as you always feared, Robert sighed. I can trust no other. Ned stared at the marsh stretching south, full of mist snakes over black water. We reclaimed the living from death's doorstep, yet my heart tells me there is worse ahead. When Rhaegar returns, banners will clash again. I cannot crown a dragon, Robert growled. Nor can you burn a city, Ned said. They stood in silence until torches below flickered on, painting long shadows across stone. Robert's hammer butt tapped the parapet. When the time comes, old friend, will you stand with me? Ned answered slowly. I will stand for the realm and for the people. If that means standing at your side, then yes. If it means standing between you and ruin, I will do that too. Done? Robert's eyes glistened. Whether from wind or memory, Ned could not tell. He reached, clasped Ned's shoulder once, hard, then descended the stair without a word. On the 28th dawn, the first caravan of Southron harvest wagons arrived, via the coast road. Tyrol barley, red wine, Florent wool, tea. Mace Tyrol's letter rode with them, sealed in thick green wax. The Reach would muster 40,000 spears for Robert's next campaign. But the offer came at a price unsaid. Clemency for Queen Rhaella should she flee there. Trade preference. Betrothals. John Arryn's raven echoed similar bargains from the Vale. Each promise of swords carried its own noose, waiting. In the quiet between councils, Ned sat in Winterfell's Godswood, thinking of the last words Benjen spoke. Do not let them sound it again. The broken horn remained locked in a stone vault beneath the crypts now. Dragonglass dust encircled its chest. Each night Ned dreamed of it mending itself, sounded by faceless shadows. He would wake cold, reaching for the dagger beside his bed. On such a night, with wind rattling shutters and ghost pacing restless below the window, Ned heard a soft knock. He opened the door to find Jon, face pale. Father, Jon whispered, Benjen's horn. It sings. They hurried through vacant passages to the vault. 2 guards slumped against the wall, asleep though neither remembered closing eyes. Inside, the iron-bound chest rattled faintly, lid lifting a hair, falling. Jon drew ice, point leveled. Ned unlatched the clasp and flung the lid wide. A faint blue mist hovered over the cracked mouthpiece. It pulsed like a single heartbeat, then faded. An onyx shard lay detached from the horn's rim, surface slick with frost. Ned scooped it in gloved hand, feeling its chill even through leather. He dropped it in a brazier's bowl. Flames hissed, flared green-blue, then died. Jon muttered, It heals itself. They sealed chest again, layered extra chains. Ned ordered 4 new guards rotated every hour, each armed with dragonglass pikes. As he and Jon climbed back toward the surface, Ned thought he heard distant horns, one long, one short, echo through stone. He dismissed it as memory, though sleep refused to return that night. Far south, the sky above King's Landing remained deceptively bright. Merchants hawked tangerines from Dorne, fig pastries from the Reach, and small wooden effigies of the Mad King holding aloft a wildfire jar, trinkets bought in dark corners by those who hid nervous laughter behind 2 warm smiles. Beneath cobbled lanes, pyromancers worked by candle, stacking earthen pot after pot inside labyrinth vaults. Their prayers chanted in tongues forgotten by the 7. Green shadows danced on vaulted brick. Above them, Aerys Targaryen paced the Iron Throne Hall, nails blackened from scratching scabs only he could feel. He spoke to unseen councils, promising fire, licking cracked lips whenever he imagined the screams. Queen Rhaella, pale as morning ash, prepared her ship. In secret she counted supporters, a handful of Queensguard still sworn to her, 2 ship's captains who owed debts, 5 maids willing to risk rope for her pearls. She sent ravens to Dorne begging sanctuary for herself and young Viserys. She did not know some ravens never reached Sunspear. Others delivered only torn scraps fluttering to courtyards where servants muttered of ill omens. When a whisper reached the Iron Throne that Rhaegar sailed north with a fleet, Aerys laughed until blood spilled from gums. He ordered the main gate barred, loyal lords summoned, and wildfire caches double. "Let my treacherous son see how the dragon truly breathes," he crooned. The first day of the 30th dawn came cold and clear over Moat Cailin. Robert's horn call echoed from every watchtower. 2 blasts to muster, 1 to march. Armored ranks formed by Torchglow. Stormlords, Northmen, Riverlanders, a scattering of Reach Knights who had ridden in advance of Tyrell host. Ned embraced Catelyn under the gate arch. She pressed a pouch of mother's hair into his fist for luck. Robb donned wolf helm and joined Roger Racewell at the vanguard. Jon, now legitimized as Jon Stark, rode with the scouting outriders, ghost-bounding pale beside him. Ice hung across his back, heavy as memory. They crossed the neck beneath banners stiff in hoarfrost. From high ridges, they could see the ruin of the wall, a jagged necklace of ice shards gleaming under winter's sun. On the 4th night, a sleet storm sealed every boot to ground. They chopped themselves free, cursing. On the 10th, they reached the Green Fork, where Lord Frey demanded safe conduct from the dead in exchange for his bridge. Robert nearly lopped the old man's head. Ned negotiated, promising a royal marriage among Frey brood if they reached summer alive. Robert called it folly. Ned called it strategy. Half a realm away, on the narrow sea, Rhaegar's sails snapped tight in a brisk southerly. Storm clouds guttered along horizon, but did not break. Under the prince's orders, every man immersed obsidian arrowheads in lamp oil, bracing them for quick fire. By noon of the 7th day, Dragonstone's black spires pierced haze. Smoke drifted from the volcano's throat, a living reminder of fire that slept but never died. When Rhaegar set foot on the familiar beach, 2 brothers of the Kingsguard awaited. Sir Oswell Went and Sir Gerald Hightower. They saluted, blade tips down, faces unreadable. "My prince," Hightower said, "your father has named you traitor and commands your arrest." His voice softened. "But we know Wildfire would spare no white cloak. Tell us your will." Rhaegar blew out a breath of brine-tinged air. "My will is the realm's salvation," he said. "Sheathe your swords. Swear to that, and I shall let knighthood mean something again." Went and Hightower exchanged looks, then knelt. "We are yours," they said together. Rhaegar led them up steep paths to the high hall, where banners of Red Dragon hung tattered by salt storms. He addressed garrison captains, commanding every barrel of cookware oil to be boiled, every kettle drum rigged for signal, every raven sent to the marches. At midnight he entered the Dragonmon's hidden nursery, where 3 stone eggs lay cradled on velvet. They pulsed faintly, like embers under ash. Rhaegar laid bare palm upon them and sang a soft verse, an old Rhoynar lullaby once taught by his mother. Within the eggs, ashen shell, something stirred, if only a distant heartbeat. The royal host reached the Trident one dusky evening, setting camp near the shallows where Rhaegar's ruby had once fallen into river mud. Robert stood upon the bank beneath a sky-streaked rose, boots sinking, and spoke to Ned in a voice so low it almost merged with running water. "I killed him here," he said. "Now I march beside his son." He knelt, scooped a handful of pebbles, let them run through fingers. "If tomorrow I must raise hammer again, and Rhaegar stands in my way." Ned crouched, touched water. "Then we will find another ford," he said. Robert looked at him, brow furrowed. Ned continued, "We have fought death itself, Robert. Do not chase smaller ghosts." That night Robert dreamed of Lyanna riding a white mare through a snow-filled hall. She looked back only once, eyes endless pools of sorrow, before fading behind curtains of drifting petals that might have been either snow or winter roses. In the Vale Jon Arryn convened a council of hawks. Ravens from Winterfell and Dragonstone alike spilled tales of dead kings in northern snows and mad kings in southern keeps. The Lord of the Eyrie weighed oaths against survival. He wrote 2 letters, one to Robert, pledging 1,000 knights when the first scarlet leaf fell from the giant's lance, the other to Rhaegar, offering sanctuary for his son Aegon should doom befall the Dragonline. He sealed both with the Arryn Falcon, and prayed the sky might forgive such balance. When Robert's columns reached the edge of the Blackwater Rush, King's Landing shimmered in summer haze. Walls pale and tall, pennants snapping on royal standards. Refugees clogged the Roserad, streaming out in fear of wildfire rumors. Gold cloaks denied them egress. Fights erupted, torches flung, smoke tongues licked sky to the west. Robert ordered siege encampments on every hilltop, but forbade engines to loose. "Hold," he told his commanders, "until the dragon returns." Inside the city, Queen Rhaegar gathered her household to flee. They loaded barges at nightfall under cloak of fog, escorted by Hightower's younger cousin in borrowed guard livery. 12 jars of wildfire hidden among barley sacks were found and tossed to river before they could poison flight. On the pier Viserys wept, a boy clinging to a broken toy griffin, as city lights dwindled behind them. The next morning, Aerys learned of his queen's flight. He howled, ordered the guild hall burned for treachery, then clapped and shrieked when green flame consumed the door and licked up marble columns. "Beautiful," he murmured, eyes glassy. Pyromancers knelt, awaiting the word that would unleash all vaults. But Aerys swayed, humming to himself, forgetting the final phrase midway. Rhaegar's fleet rounded Cape Wrath, in pre-dawn gloom of the 4th day after Robert's arrival. A storm front loomed, yet the wind favored from northeast, driving them swift. Behind the princes, great galley Silverwing sailed 5 supply ships and 2 Dornish Dromons under secret charter. Morning sun rose blood-red over the rippling bay as they flew dragon banners side by side with the stag of Baratheon. On the hills, Robert watched the sails appear. Thunder of cheers broke along ridgeline. Ned exhaled the breath he had held for 3 days. But before Rhaegar could drop anchor, city gates opened and a rider poured forth on lathered horse under flag of truce. He wore green cloak, sewn with golden chain. Sir Jaime Lannister of the King's Guard. Blood flecked his white armor. He rode straight to Robert, ignored drawn swords, and dismounted before the king. "Aerys is dead," he said, voice hollow. In gauntleted fist, he held the dragon crown, crusted red, slain by my hand as he reached for his wildfire command. "The vaults are sealed. The city is yours, or his." He looked to the sails. Robert's jaw set. He took the crown, heavy, stained, stared at it like a stranger. Ned stepped nearer, saw grief in Lannister eyes no jest could hide. Jaime swayed, blood dripping from beneath breastplate. He had not come unscathed. Rhaegar's ships beached on mudflats moments later. The prince strode up slope, cloak soaked, armor gleaming above silt. He slowed at the sight of crown in Robert's hands, Jaime kneeling wounded. "What deed is this?" Rhaegar called. "I ended madness," Jaime said, voice ragged. "For love of a city that never loved me." Rhaegar's eyes glistened. He looked at Robert. Behind the 2 men, the realm seemed to hold its breath. Robert lifted the crown, its rubies dull in weak light, and offered it to Rhaegar. "Take it," he said. "I won my war the moment the dead lay slain." He thrust the iron circlet forward. "Rule, but rule well." Gasps rippled. Rhaegar's hand rose, halted. "I will take it only if you place it," he answered quietly. "For the realm must see we stand together." Robert hesitated. Then he smiled, faint yet true, and set crown upon Rhaegar's silver-blonde head. Lannister trumpets blared, Tully horns answered, Mormont drums thundered. The war was over, yet what followed would test peace harder than any sword fight. Rhaegar turned first act as king to Jaime. "Rise, Sir Jaime. Your father's debts are not yours, but know this mercy binds Lannister to realm." "Dew." Jaime bowed, blood-slick hair guttering over eyes that held both relief and dread. He whispered, "Long may you reign," though whether it was prayer or curse none could discern. They entered the city by mid-afternoon. Littered corpses of riot victims lined streets, but no green fires raged. Robert ordered wine wagons opened for the small folk. Ned oversaw grain handouts from Reach caravans. Rhaegar walked barefoot through Flea Bottom, letting mud cover golden sandals, speaking with beggars, promising reconstruction of burnt Guildhall. In the Red Keep, The Iron Throne awaited. Scorch marks blackened dais from Aerys's last tantrum. Rhaegar ascended to first step, then paused. He looked down at Ned, Jon, Robb, at Robert still specked with giant's blood, and motioned all to stand beside. "We share this burden," he said. His voice filled hall, vaulted tall as ambition. "The wall may fall again if men grow divided. So let there be 3 pillars, fire, ice, and storm." He placed Robert's hand upon Throne's arm, Ned's upon the other, and his own between. Blades of twisted swords pricked each wrist. Blood mingled, dripping on ancient steel, sealing a covenant no maester could write. From gallery archways servants gasped. Some cheered, some crossed themselves. The kingdoms trembled on edge of a future, forged not by conquest, but by union against death. Somewhere far away, perhaps north where ice cliffs hovered, perhaps beyond slim veil that separated living from the lost. A horn note sighed. It faded almost before it could be named, like a memory of winter receding into spring. But Ned Stark felt it in the scar over his heart. Jon heard it through Ghost's growl that rumbled deep, though no threat stood near. Rhaegar's head lifted, eyes narrowing as though listening. Robert only smiled, oblivious, content at last. Under stained glass windows where dragons and stags danced in perpetual war of light, 3 men stood bound by crimson threads, and the realm watched to see whether those threads would weave a greater banner or fray like frost-bitten silk when next wind rose. On the high battlements of Dragonstone, as dusk turned the sea to molten gold, 3 stone eggs cracked in unison. A single wisp of steam curled skyward, caught the dying light, and shimmered like dawn.